He is the architect of alternate universes, a digital deity who spun up a star system and let humanity run wild. In Eve, betrayal is a feature, spreadsheets are weapons, and players wage wars worth more than your house. He's turned chaos into case studies and MMOs into mirrors of mankind. He did not script the story, but he did light the match. Joining me from Iceland to outer space, from visionary to virtual reality, I am joined by the legend Hilmar Veigar Pétursson. Hilmar, thank you so much for joining me today, brother.
Yeah, very happy to be here.
All right, first up, you've said that virtual worlds are the laboratories of the future. If that's the case, how would you judge Eve Frontier as a laboratory to this point?
Yeah, I think, I mean, over the decades of running Eve and just MMOs existing, we constantly see various aspects of human existence, especially in a social sense, sort of mirrored throughout the endless amount of stories these games tend to generate. And I mean, I would say, at least maybe it's my own kind of selection bias, because I see obviously most of the stories from Eve, but it does feel that Eve generates like more stories than most games. And I think there are a few kind of core design elements that lead to that. One is that we really kind of open up the space for people to tell their own stories. It's very much a sandbox experience, and us, kind of the makers of the game, are not so preoccupied with running our own narratives in the world. It is largely run by players. And then on top of the fact that there's really just one server where everyone is playing, then the stories are in a way more impactful than perhaps some stories from a smaller server of a game. So I think those two properties kind of definitely lead to this being kind of, as we often call it, the infinitely scalable storytelling engine is some catchphrase we came up with at some point. And if we look at Frontier, then we are adding a few properties to the mix, which in many ways should enhance these properties even more. I would call out number one is the deep embrace that we have created for third-party developers and modders. This is an emergent outcome from the journey of Eve, where from first sharing Excel sheets with metadata about the game to having an API gateway that people can mostly read, can actually do a bit of writing, but it's mostly reading, and have written a phenomenal amount of software around Eve over the years. If you go on GitHub and check out Awesome Eve, then you can see what has been created, or at least what has been categorized and documented there. But this was kind of an afterthought. Like, we were not very much thinking about this when we were designing the game, and this is kind of something that has emerged just as the years and decades have piled on. And in many ways, the game is ill-prepared from like a kind of a deep premise of doing it. So one of the intriguing thing when I was observing blockchain first from afar is this fact that you basically have smart contracts which exist in an economically adversarial environment, which is not a very common environment to have software exist in. Sure, everyone is trying to hack everything and all that, but blockchains have taken it to another level. Like, there is like real PvP with money happening on most of the blockchains. And that intrigued me because the permissionlessness, the fact that anyone can just add a new contract or create an app of sorts on a blockchain. And again, in a very antagonistic environment. Seemed like a hardened premise to allow that to happen in an MMO. Because as soon as you start to allow rights into the state and all those things, you by code which you have no control over, it is quite a feat to get that to function, and probably so. I mean, for almost a decade when we look at the longest running smart contract chains. So so this aspect, okay, going from an API to like players playing the game can really just add new software to the game in runtime. You don't need like server downtimes or anything. That felt very intriguing. So I think that will enhance their storytelling power, because people are now not just telling their stories with politics and memes. They're literally writing the concrete reality of the universe with us. Like they're not just writing stories about what happens in the world. They're literally creating the world with us. And this obviously has never been done before. This is quite different than if we take a look at like a Fortnite or UEFN for Fortnite or Roblox or something like that. This is almost like closer to be like a Minecraft private server with your own kind of house rules, where you've done a lot of modification to that, except it's an MMO. So there's just one unified truth of everything that happens in this world, and people can literally change the reality of the world. So that's very exciting. Then the other thing that we wanted to experiment with is the fact that Eve runs as a closed economy, and coming from Iceland, it is well understood, if you live in a country like Iceland, which has a very small currency system, that the economy can be opened or closed. Like Iceland, for most of its 100 years of having its own currency system, ran under a closed economy. And we started to open up the economy maybe sort of 20 years ago. And it did take a while to get Iceland up to speed on where it currently is operating on a fairly stable system. There was a bit of instability, obviously, during the economic collapse in 2008, where the fact that Iceland was an open economy was something that we needed to contest with. But overall, the country has been way more prosperous with an open economy rather than a closed economy. And it's always appealed deeply to me to figure out how can we take a virtual economy like an MMO economy and think about that as a national economy, where it is just one of the economies amongst the other economies, and it can interact and frankly compose with the different economies. So this idea of running an MMO with an open economy, I believe, should lead to more storytelling powers, just like it has been a similar case for Iceland, from going from a closed economy to an open economy. I remember like going on vacation with my parents. We're going to Denmark or Spain or something for summer vacation, and they had to go to the bank to prove that they had airplane tickets for this amount of time, and then they were rationed either Danish crowns or pesos based on the length of time. Like,
wow!
Imagine going from that to something more open. So these two properties, I believe, like the fact that the game is open for modding and third-party development, and the economy is open to compose with the rest of the economies of planet Earth. I think these two things are pretty profound, and especially when it comes to these kind of infinitely scalable storytelling engines that these kind of games become.
I think that's absolutely awesome. And it segues really nicely into my next question, which is you have an amazing quote that is, they claim they don't want it, but I have facts that prove otherwise. And I'm curious what the most compelling piece of evidence is. You mentioned a few things that as a gamer would be appealing to me, but what do you think is really that piece that people don't recognize that maybe blockchain is the solve for, but that you have evidence that they do actually desire to have integrated into this game?
So I think, one is kind of the actual implementation of it. And sure, we have used the blockchain to implement these things. And there are technical reasons for that. But again, the adversarial economic environment that is basically proven to work in that kind of premise. but there's also a legal framing that blockchains operate under, which is very useful to do an open game economy. If you do it a different way, which you could also do, then you fall under money market regulations. You have to do you basically become a bank, and that is a lot for a game. It's hard enough to make an MMO, but to also become a bank out the gate is a lot. So the useful framing of blockchains is both this technical framing, but also this legal and regulatory framing, where because the blockchain has these properties of being an open ledger and being kind of us making the game don't really control the blockchain as a platform, and that creates this kind of sovereignty that fits differently in the legal framing, etc. So I would say these are more like implementation details. But if I look at the other two things of okay, do people want a multiple MMO? Well, I think we have plenty of data from EVE Online on very much so. We never do enough for our ESI gateway, which is kind of what people use to interface. And I mean, we're even doubling down on it this year, really strengthening that up. Do people want open economies? I think you could argue both ways. I think it is a rather novel concept to think of a game economy as an open economy, and we do have data. I mean, obviously, our own data. We fight constantly real money trading in EVE Online because it's not against our terms of service there, and we will continue to fight that and keep the premise of EVE Online as a closed economy. You can kind of put money into the economy through Plex, but you can't take it out. Still, it happens rapidly through real money trading on sort of gray market websites all around the world. So there seem to be at least some amount of people that want it, given that real money trading has such a robust business for all MMOs. But I think it is it's hard to claim it that it is as clearly out there as the third-party development and modding. So thus we're doing this experiment, so to speak, in a separate game. We're making a new game where this is the premise. It's an open economy from the get-go. But I believe we certainly have enough data to say that it's a valid thing to make. And I think the conversation will be much easier to have to people once we have finished with this and we really see what emerges from that. I mean, of course, we have ideas, but generally what actually happens tends to be way more phenomenal than what we can imagine, kind of in the absence of just seeing what players come up with. And what we've seen so far in hackathons and playtests, etc., we're seeing kind of all of those sort of our own fantasies about it and players' fantasies about it really take shape. So I mean, I would say we have ample data for one, the modding, and we have pretty good data, at least, to run this experiment when it comes to the open economy premise.
I grew up as a diehard World of Warcraft player, and it's hard for me to imagine how insane it would be if you could allow modding inside of WoW. It's mind-bending. Sorry, as an alarm goes off at a poor time. You've described EVE as a social experiment. You kind of alluded to it right there, and you've said it's a social experiment which is a mirror held up to humanity, which I think is a really cool way of putting it. I know that there's some incredibly epic stories about things that have happened in the universe, but I'm curious specifically about what surprising patterns you might have seen and observed in players, especially whenever you introduce something that's paradigm shifting to this thing that they love, which you've done a couple of different times before with like eValkyrie and now with eFrontier and integrating blockchain. What do you sort of expect, or what have you seen in the past that has educated how you guys are approaching it this time?
So, obviously we have both done a lot of development inside Eve and outside Eve. And all these kind of developments and experiments and enhancements or like unenhancements also, I think over time start to build up a kind of a mental image about like what should be the next step. So both what happens in Eve and I think what is the most kind of it's made let's call it surprising. Like it's usually what is surprising about Eve. We did have like ideas and theories and expectations about a lot of the stuff that has happened in Eve. It is just the scope and scale of it we got completely wrong. Like it is just fascinating how much when people come together and organize. I'm very much a fan of this flexible organization at scale from Harari on discussing what is the true human superpower. It's not that our opposable thumbs allow us to use our hands. It is the fact that we can create stories as constructs to collaborate on, whether the stories are religions or companies or alliances and corporations in online. So when that all comes together, the energy that is released through that cooperation is like it holds no bounds almost. So one of the key learnings from that is that when you have such a superpower unleashed, which is this kind of collaboration of tens of thousands of players, as we see in Eve, then in a way you have to create the world. You have to create a world that demands more of that, because we weren't like, or the world we created was only so demanding of players to cooperate. And I think if we look at our own world is pretty demanding of what is on display for us to kind of master in terms of mastering our environment. Again, coming from Iceland, nobody should live in Iceland. Like, it's just not the place you should live in. It's like, it's in the middle of the North Atlantic, gale force winds. It's like, everything about that environment wants to kill you. If it isn't the gale force winds in January, it's the earthquakes. If it isn't the earthquakes, it's the volcanoes. Right. It's not the volcanoes, it's the geysers. If not, it's the glacial rivers that once in a while surge and just like take all of it to the ocean. Like, it really is an inhospitable place. But through amazing feat of collaboration involving drilling holes into volcanoes to get hot water to heat our houses and our driveways for basically free. Then the people of Iceland have harnessed that harsh environment through collaboration and technology into, I mean, Iceland is now a very pleasant place to live in. Like, geothermal power does a lot to melt away the snow from your driveway. Like, that's literally, like, the sidewalks of Reykjavik are heated up through the process of drilling volcanoes. So when this is what we can do as people, then, and I mean, before, probably within our lifetime, I mean, we will, I mean, we're going to go to the moon again. And I think, I mean, having a moon base is definitely in our lifetime. Yeah. And then, I mean, there is even speculation that there's going to be a human settlement on Mars. I mean, it is like such a harsh environment. Yeah. And the world that we are born into has all these challenges. So then, understanding how much this gets unleashed in a game like EVE Online, that was some of the okay. So I guess EVE Online wasn't hard enough, which is kind of a silly statement to say. But if this superpower Homo sapiens is activated so much with an MMO of this scale and scope and challenge, then why not make it harder? So
Wow.
and that is very much the thinking that has gone into Frontier. Like the environment in Frontier really wants to kill you. And if the environment doesn't kill you, then it's the autonomous machine life that is developed for thousands of years on the Frontier that wants to kill you. And if that doesn't kill you, it is probably the other players that are there lurking in the dark. So now the cooperation challenge and the competition challenge and all that we've just kind of cranked everything up and then added modding and added open economy on top of it. So that seems like a big slate to go and master for people.
That's absolutely amazing from a design philosophy angle. There's been sort of a fundamental shift between EVE Online and now Frontier, where it is sort of turning into a survival game, from what I can tell, from being more of like a sci-fi MMO, which, I mean, it still has those elements, obviously, but the two big ones that have stuck out to me are deciding to make it so that there isn't as much player information. Like, you don't know necessarily who's in the world with you and around you, which makes it always much more suspenseful to enter those areas. And then also I've heard that you're going to have this sort of like base level like degradation that happens to everything in the universe, so that you can't just sit on the biggest ship and wait forever. Is that accurate? And what goes into deciding what's too far, or do you just crank it all the way up to 10 and assume that the players will figure out how to navigate even the most treacherous environment because of that philosophy that you just mentioned?
So, I mean, we are definitely cranking it up to 10 or even 11 in the beginning, because it's easier to dial it back rather than to jack it up. So I think it's good to test out just the extremes and see like what is too far, or maybe not all of the world is that crazy, and there are maybe little oases of more sane environment. Certainly in the premise of the game, around these 3 black holes, which kind of literally rip the fabric of space and time apart. We're very much in this camp of like space, time, and even gravity being emergent properties of the universe. And there's an underlying phenomenon which you haven't fully discovered behind all that. I mean, on the Frontier, it's called the stillness. It's kind of like behind the illusions of our senses, you'll find the stillness. There's a lot lower on the website to read about that if you're awesome. if you're into sci-fi lore.
Yeah.
So we're definitely cranking it up to 11. It's easier to dial it back, and a lot of that has to do with kind of what is very much inspired by survival games. And has kind of given us the focus of making the premise of the game literally about survival. Like EVE Online is more like a space opera, kind of in a kind of that sort of genre of science fiction. So it's a vastly populated world. Thousands of solar systems with bustling of culture and trillions of people, and it's very grandiose in the scale of the culture that is formulated inside EVE Online. Like EVE Online is a very sort of cultured world. Like we have the different races, all the different sort of NPC factions, and all the backstories about like the culture that has been kind of growing up in New Eden for over 20,000 years. So it's a very kind of grand, bustling, kind of utopic, dystopic kind of mix. Kind of you go from something like Galente, which is very sort of dystopia, and now utopia, and into something like Blood Raiders, which are kind of more dystopic and things like that. So that is kind of the framing, but for Frontier, it's very much about survival. The world is so hospitable around these 3 black holes that human culture has failed multiple times, but the spoils are great. Like when space and time are ripping apart close to the black holes, then you can actually you can mine out of those rifts in space and time, crude matter. It's an extraordinarily powerful substance. So that's why humans continue to try to build up colonies around the frontier. And the keeper, if you've played in the current Founder Access, it's trying to restart like a culture going yet again. And he has had some failed starts already, or it has had some failed starts already. So the topic of the entire thing is about survival. It's about survival as you as an individual. It's about survival of your tribe. Everything there wants to kill you. Again, referencing Iceland. If it isn't the entropy in the world that is killing you, if it isn't running out of fuel that's going to kill you, like there are just so many ways to die and fail that it really demands cooperation at considerable scale to be mastered, kind of like Iceland or Moon or Mars or Antarctica or something like that. So this kind of survival is woven into every fabric of being in Frontier, whereas in EVE Online it's more the sort of space opera grandness of culture and human achievement, which is more kind of the premise. And I think if you go into its game or its world today, now that we've kind of got in Frontier to a pretty good stance, at least enough for us to take the NDA away, it's now getting quite clear what the game wants to be, and it really wants to be this evil thing that wants to kill you. That's what it wants to be.
You bring up a really interesting point with the games being so different, and I think a lot of people that haven't played in the EVE universe expect this to be almost like an expansion. And I'm curious, from your point of view, how many, if you have, let's say, 100 players, what percentage of them do you expect to be enthusiastic about this, what sounds like a very different experience, even though it's similar in lore? And I want to drop another quote here, which is, in nature you strip mine, you destroy the environment. We should have offensive mining where you destroy your opponent's environment. So taking survival, again, even up another notch, where players are actively trying to take resources and destroy what others have, which is sort of present in EVE Online, but maybe not to the same degree. Do you expect this to be a completely different audience, or a small Venn diagram, or a huge Venn diagram? What's your expectation?
So it's generally with MMOs. MMOs are like a buffet of various type of gameplay. Like your typical MMO has various different ways to play it, and EVE Online probably more so than others. Although there's success for all MMOs. Like you can be a miner, you can be like you can be a politician, you can be a corporate leader, you can be a cult leader, you can be like an extreme sportsman that competes in our alliance tournament in kind of, I don't know, the most beautiful display of spaceship ballet ever seen in the world. Like, there are just so many different things you can do. And what we have learned from talking to EVE players over decades is it does attract a wide array of different type of people into the game. Like, more so than the kind of the stereotypes kind of would say. And overall, if I count everyone that has kind of played any kind of EVE game, like all the different EVE games and EVE Online itself in the West and in China, it's about 60 million people. So there's a lot of people which are interested in the topic of like space and science fiction, and it's probably an even bigger number. Like, living in a futuristic science fiction world is an appealing concept in and of itself. Then obviously what you're doing there as gameplay every day of the week for decades, that might be something which then people have different opinions on. So I think it is like, I think absolutely a lot of people that have gone into EVE Online and tried it for the reason of like participating in something like that, think we'll go and try this out and try it, and it's different, and it's it it will retain a different audience than Eve retains, but I think the attraction might be more similar. And I think the especially when we are now going to have 2 space games, then the differentiation of them starts to become more and more important for us. How do we frame the sort of epic space opera and the cruel survival experience? Kind of which door do you want to open? I think as we get Frontier of the Ground and the games are coexisting, we will increasingly have to become better at sort of explaining that we have 2 space games, and but they're quite different. So what we have seen so far in the founder access is it's about 70% players that have played EVE Online at some point, and then 30% comes from just like all over the place. It is not so much people which are playing EVE right now, and it's actually not really what we're looking for. We're not. I mean, we have massive ambitions for EVE Online, like so we were talking about in our last FanFest, and delivering with expansions throughout this year and updates and all that, like big visions for EVE Online. So we're not really looking for people to kind of move from country to country. I often use like an analogy of like EVE Online is Rome and Frontier is New York, and Frontier is more kind of, I don't know, I often pick like Daniel Day-Lewis movies. Is it like Last Mohican? Is it There Will Be Blood? Or is it Gangs of New York? Like which version of New York it is? It's somewhere between Last Mohican and There Will Be Blood. There certainly will be blood, so that's a very apt title. So we're not really asking people to vacate Rome to go and join Daniel Day-Lewis on the frontier. So yeah, I think we will definitely pull people from the long history of EVE Online, and I think, I mean, if we look at something like World of Warcraft Classic, that did reactivate a lot of people, which were no longer playing World of Warcraft, that went into Classic. That was another kind of piece of data that we used when thinking about this, and even if, like, obviously Frontier is not like EVE Classic, it is still like a version of EVE that should exist. Like it's taken some elements of EVE. I mean, if you've played in Wormholes in EVE Online, it feels a little similar to that. Like, I mean, this kind of base building that we're really focusing on, that is something we've kind of been noodling around in EVE Online for, frankly, decades, from bosses to citadels, etc. So you could see, like, if you are a connoisseur of the development history of CCP, you can pull together the threads which have been our various sort of pushes on EVE and outside of EVE over the years, and you can almost see little DNA strands of like, okay, here's where that kind of idea comes from, but also from other games. Obviously, the world of games have moved on many cycles since we were developing EVE Online in the beginning.
Yeah, I love so much how you see the game itself that you've created, and I wanted to read this other quote from you in PC Gamer in 2019. You had this absolute banger. I got chills whenever I read this for the first time. You said, "Think about it like EVE is an organism. EVE does not like where it's going. It's no longer limber. It's lost its stamina and mobility. It feels stiff. EVE comes to me in a dream and says, 'Hilmar, release the hounds of war.'" Which you said it was how the famous Chaos era, happened in EVE. And then you continue to say, "It came to me in a dream and said, 'This cannot go on. I do not like this. This is not what it was meant to be. The game has a purpose. It wants to finish its mission. Its mission is much longer than what it has been executed as in the last 16 years. And you were asked what EVE wants, and you replied that its mission is world domination. It wants to establish a new invention. So this is a two-part question. First off, is Frontier that new invention, or is it some iteration of EVE Online? And second off is, what does EVE world domination look like? Because I think that's such a beautiful framing.
So this is from 2019. There was a lot going on there. So so there was a period sort of from 18 into 19 where I think the process of developing EVE Online had reached kind of a bit of diminishing returns. It was kind of in a plot hole or a rabbit hole. Kind of it was like it needed disruption, and there was a lot of disruption in 19. It is often called the chaos era, both where we travel into every single country, it seems. I think we went to 9 different locations around the world when we took FanFest on a world tour.
Wow.
I think a lot of what you're reading there actually comes from FanFest at home in Finland, very much inspired in somewhat by meeting all the wormholers from Finland in FanFest at home. But yeah, there was a certain kind of reimagination we needed to do in developing EVE Online, and a lot was pushed through during 19. We had Team Talos, which was delivering updates every 2 weeks. We did a fairly grand experiment about removing local, which is about increasing information asymmetry in EVE, which for sure you will see in spades in Frontier. And all sorts of different things. There were radical changes to the structure of the dev team, the leadership of the dev team. And while most of the sort of public stuff was happening in 19, then it did continue. Obviously, then we have the pandemic kind of hitting in the year after. And but we are in this sort of reinvention of a lot of our work processes and how we organize everything around EVE. And when I compare where we are now, 6 years later, it is phenomenal how much better we are at developing EVE Online than we were maybe kind of coming sort of 17, 18, 19. And you see that we see that just in service of the dev team. We see that in interaction with our Council of Sterile Management. We see that in concrete results for each and every expansion. So while 19 was kind of the kickoff, the ongoing work has been playing out now in the sort of 5 years to follow. And we're really in a good place there. But there is this element also, as we were doing this, is that people don't like to live in a world where so much R&D is happening on like their own. I mean, EVE is a place that people live in. So and again, I mean, it became very clear to me that if I want to this radically change EVE, it's better to do it in the construct of a new game and make that game the radicalness rather than disrupt the existing ecosystem, because the existing ecosystem has also become its own thing, its own culture, its kind of own country of sorts. It's better to go and build New York rather than put a skyscraper on top of the Colosseum in Rome, like to do a very sort of crude analogy.
Sure.
So then it's about all this kind of EVE coming to me in a dream. So, I mean, obviously dreams are ways to kind of defragment your sort of thought process. Like it's probably what is happening when you're dreaming. Like there's some background process which is doing housekeeping on your subconscious, and that expresses as dreams. And as you can just imagine, I think a lot about EVE Online. Like I don't think there's an hour that goes by where I'm not thinking about EVE Online at least 1 minute of every hour of my life for the past 25 years.
Wow.
I've been thinking about EVE Online. So you can just imagine if my brain is doing that all day long, then in the night that does express itself like this, and often the weirdest ways. So I think I am now there sort of channeling myself, obviously. You're quoting myself. As everyone knows, I don't have a big filter when I talk to the press. I just literally say what I'm thinking. But this is an artifact of that. It's just I am possessed by EVE Online. Literally, I think about it every single day, and maybe not like every single minute of every day, but close to it. So the I like the best way to describe this a bit is like, I mean, if you are like a president or a prime minister of a country, it is very much the expectation that that person is full on doing that job.
Right.
And I can imagine what that is like, and it's perhaps easier to understand because it's something that we've been watching for a long time, and we can see leaders being possessed about what their country wants to be, and what it wants to be like, and very often political platforms are about some drastic changes in how the country is, what the culture is like, etc. And countries also very much have this drive for world domination. Like I think we've seen the history of mankind is
right.
full of those kind of aspirations. And it does seem to be almost like an inherent property of social constructs to want to propagate and turn everything into a monoculture of themselves. So.
Right.
So if I'm interpreting myself here, when I say Eve wants to dominate the world, I think it is in the same way as countries seem to have this property that they want to propagate. They want to grow, they want to prosper, and they want to expand. And often, I mean, okay, they maybe expand against another country, and okay, you're hard limits and all that. And I mean, we probably become slightly better over time at navigating those, even if like right now it seems to be not looking great. Then I think in the grand arc of life we have 8 billion people largely living in harmony on planet, if we just look at it like from a statistic standpoint. So yeah, sort of picking apart this quote you've taken up, this is a combination of all these things. Okay, Eve wants to radically innovate. It's probably better to start a new country rather than to like disrupt the current one. I think about Eve every single day, and it does express itself very clearly in my dreams as a consequence. And then this wanting to expand, I think, is a fundamental property of these constructs, be they countries, be they religions, be they sports clubs. I'm often like, when you look at the very cultist behavior of like people rooting for their football team, like that is another sort of propagation. It also has this kind of competition, like sports are very much about competition. So it's often good to look at what you're doing, in this case, like the large social construct of an MMO, through the lens of these other social constructs, and think about like deeply about like what is it really that it wants to be. And something like EVE or Frontier or frankly any MMO really, they have these kind of mixture of all these things. I mean, they are obviously their own thing, but because there are people engaging in it, then those people are obviously engaging in it kind of in this way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think about EVE compared to World of Warcraft to bring up an example that we've used a couple of times already. And you guys have experimented with VR. Now you're experimenting with blockchain. And I know that there's been a lot of maybe less radical pivots in there or experiments in there as well. And if I look at World of Warcraft, they've actually had the most success, to use the example you used, going backwards, which was going back to classic My personal claim to fame is I told them they should do Classic 8 years before they did it, and they told me it was impossible on their forums. And then magically they figured it out whenever there was enough of a market for it. But I'm curious if you think that this, I guess, iterative willingness to adopt new technology is necessary for the success of EVE Online, or is it just because you want to do it and you feel like there is, a lot of it's fun to do and it's something that you want to do, and also it could lead to a lot of success because you have such a radical approach versus a World of Warcraft or a Guild Wars 2 that's just been kind of doing the same thing for a very long time?
Yeah, so I think, technologies, tools, and techniques are what we as people use to improve our societies. Like, again, going back to Iceland, the fact that we have geothermal indoor plumbing turns Iceland from a rather unhospitable place into a fairly cozy indoor environment at serious scale. So I think like you generally want to use technology to enhance what it is that you're doing. And we've done a lot of it in EVE over the years. EVE starts as a very different application. It was 32-bit Windows software, and now we've just done a lot. But there's a lot more available. For example, when we were doing VR, VR is very sort of relevant in our sort of core mission of to make virtual worlds more meaningful than real life. Like the immersion you have from VR is a very powerful design construct, and we did 4 VR games. They actually did quite well. I think. I think overall we did about $50 million in revenue out of our VR games, which is not too shabby given how early the market was.
Yeah.
It's only now in recent times where more games have made more revenue, like a Beat Saber or Gorilla Tag or these kind of games are definitely happening now. But the reason why we took a break in 2017 is that we just saw the adoption curve in our own data was just really slowing down. Then it picked up again a little bit with the Quest and iterations of Quest, etc. But it's still, even today, if it's come a long way, not quite there, but it makes sense. Just the install base needs to be more, such that you could make a VR MMO. So the games we were making, from Gunjack to Valkyrie to Spark, were obviously not MMOs because it was just too early to make an MMO. We lacked the kind of, I call it almost like the verbs of gameplay to construct into an MMO. Like we were just discovering these little nuggets of interaction. It's cool to throw things. Here's a way to move. Here's a way to do this. Like we were having all these kind of fragments of like what you could weave into something like a VR MMO. And we, even today, now in 2025, I don't believe we're quite there. So that's why we took a break on that. But it for sure taught us a lot about, like, especially with Valkyrie, how much power there is in a more immersive way to navigate spaceships. And we have taken some of that into really deeply investing in our physics engine for Frontier, because we've largely been running the same physics engine for EVE, with mainly optimizations, not many radical changes, because it's very hard to change the physics engine because you have to retrofit all the content back into the new physics engine. And it's almost like to make all the kind of hundreds of spaceships in EVE again for a new physics engine is perhaps not like well, to do that, you need to be very assured that you are doing the right thing. Whereas, like in Frontier, we have the freedom of just like we can just change the physics engine, build a few spaceships, have people engage with it, and tune in a much sort of simpler environment where we don't have to take like 300 spaceships and balance against the new physics engine. We just have the spaceships which we have in Frontier right now. And by more deeply invest in the physics engine, we've upped the tick rate, with added orientation, line of sight, and these are kind of, for every property you add to the physics engine, the emergent outcome is very drastic. Now we're kind of adding topological fitting and all these kind of things. And in part, like, even if it's not like obvious to see how Valkyrie leads to that, it is like Valkyrie was a way to increase the immersion of flying a spaceship, and it just turned into like a phenomenal way. Like, Valkyrie really was a phenomenal game, and that kind of backtracks into this. Okay, now we're going to make Frontier, and the first order of business is we're going to spend 2 years in improving our physics engine. That's the most important thing. It wasn't all these blockchain things or the open economy and all that. No, it was the physics engine. And I had like a long cheat list of like all the things we if I had a time machine, I would go back in time, and this is what I would do to the physics engine.
And you have another quote that ties into this too, and it's not about photorealism, it's about belief in the world, which I think has been your design philosophy for most of the way. I mean, I'm sure it still is, but at a certain point you go, okay, it's been X amount of time with the current physics engine, with the current graphical settings, whatever it may be. And now whenever you hit the reset button and add in all this new technology, you can do things like, you mentioned line of sight. Whenever I got the demo of Frontier the other day, they mentioned that now you can block missiles and lasers that are coming between ships, which I think is a really amazing sort of feat of technology. If you imagine having hundreds of ships all shooting things and being able to track all of that, how do you think about, I don't know, what's worthwhile to strive to implement versus what works, which is just giving people that world to believe in and getting people to believe in a world that doesn't have insane graphical fidelity to this point, you know?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's this element of line of sight is, well, I mean, usually what is hard to do in EVE is that everything has to work at scale. Like a massive fleet fight in EVE Online is 8,000 spaceships in an all-out deathmatch. Like it is serious scale. Like it's like. If EVE is number one, the number two game has a few hundred. We have 8,000. Like it's a massive scale step. So everything we do in EVE has to be thought about in that sense. It puts a lot of constraints on what parameters you can add to that equation. That is the simulation that runs that spaceship soup, so to speak. So you have to have a fairly strong conviction about everything you add, that it is going to be worth the effort of getting it in there. And you probably put a bit of a cap, at least in the beginning, on how far you can take it. Like the way, like I think 8,000 spaceships could not duke it out in Frontier. And that is fine for a period of time, because it also took a good decade for EVE players to develop the logistics and organizations to get to 8,000. It's very much a coordination problem and a technology problem. So when it comes to line of sight, I have always had a fairly high conviction about line of sight, and that in a way drags in better collision constructs like ellipsoids, not just spheres, which is kind of what we use in EVE. And as soon as you have ellipsoids, then you need to have orientation as part of the kind of differential equation set. So it's a lot of work. We literally have had an astrophysicist on this for 2 years to get it done. So, and line of sight, it seems like a small thing, but what line of sight immediately brings is formations. So the reason for formation is to limit friendly fire. If you imagine like Napoleon style, like rows of people. Now we're shooting. Now we duck down. The next row shoots. I mean, it's the formations exist to manage friendly fire, and because there is no friendly fire in EVE Online, then sort of formations make a whole less sense than they otherwise would. That's why if you look at a typical E-fight, it's usually kind of two balls of spaceships that are kind of like duking it out. It seems to resolve, and you can almost look at the math. This is almost like an organic resolve of the math behind the scenes. As soon as you add this little property of orientation, that does kind of slippery slope into all the other things I mentioned, you will just end up with a very different tactical landscape. And a tactical landscape is harder to manage if there are more parameters to manage. So again, like building a game that demands more of players to master it, this all follows this, like the world is hostile. I mean, the math is hard in this case. It was some hard math needed to get to this place. So it's all kind of underpins this one vision of like survival is just harder in this world because of all these things, which we believe have made the game more immersive, but also harder to master.
Since you're at the precipice of what it is that you're creating, like you said, nobody else can do what Eve has been able to accomplish. Who else do you look up to in the games industry? Is there a specific founder or a game that you're like, oh man, you know, it's different, but I'm so impressed by what they're able to accomplish or inspired by? I'm curious how you look at the rest of the industry.
So like it's more like different games. Like there are mechanics in games which often become like these little fragments. Often a game that might not be a good game, it maybe has this one thing that is a very good kind of thing that would fit very well into like an Eve game. And most recently I've been very inspired by Elden Ring. Like Elden Ring was like so transformative in many ways. I was never like a huge fan of Dark Souls and Demon Souls and all that, because I felt it so constraining in the way that it's almost like, I call it like it's a mixture of Sudoku and ballet. Like when you're going through the mazes of like in your mind, you're remembering the paths where the enemies are. Like, okay, I'm gonna go here and stab that guy. I'm gonna go like you develop this almost like Sudoku path in your brain, and it really sort of felt a bit like being in a straitjacket of like I'm really in a maze and it's very hard to break out of it. And then when the open worldness of Elden Ring and the almost like MMO-like grind loop of Elden Ring, I'm not very good at Elden Ring, at least compared to people that are good at Elden Ring. So I did like grind a lot, and I also just kind of a grindy person. Like I love grinding, shocking, you know. Like, so it was just so when you added that, and of course what they were adding are more like, it became more like EVE Online. But it was just something about like, okay, there's so much power in this. Often you recognize more about something that is already there just by seeing it manifest in another game.
Right, yeah.
Then I was just like in my crazy travel these days, getting into playing Clair Obscur, Expedition 33.
Yeah.
And there is something about the tactical combat there that I describe it almost like it's like a UX of a boss fight in Elden Ring. Like when you're learning all these timings and the kind of the movesets of the boss, that creates like here are openings and here are things and here you need to dodge out of the way, and like it becomes this kind of timing rhythm game. And the way I think about Expedition 33 is that they're almost like made UX around that by kind of slowing down time and kind of play, counterplay. And there is something there that feels like something you could pull off in an MMO. Like you could almost like create kind of this kind of locked session where two players are locked in some counterplay kind of momentary time that might just exist for them.
Yeah.
So now I'm trying to kind of, okay, how do I kind of make this work in Frontier is what I'm thinking. And it's often these kind of thought exercises, they become like often they concretely just manifest, or they become like there's some little fragment that might kind of come out of that we can add to our own games. Another game I spent a lot of time playing, it was a Kickstarter project by Double Fine called BattleTech, which is obviously in the world of BattleTech, which I've been playing since I was, 12, like in that world. And there's something about the topological fitting of the mechs, how heat intuitively becomes a phenomenon in the outfitting of machines, how the critical shots and how the localized damage, like these concepts map very well into an EVE-style game. So, if you played Frontier, obviously Heat was already in EVE, but it was added a year after release. It was not added fundamentally into it. And if you understand space, like the vacuum of space makes heat a real problem in space, you would think space is cold, heat is not a problem. No, because space is a vacuum. There's no dissipation through induction, it's all through radiation, etc. So, and it is a real thing, and it's intuitive a thing. So there's an element of adding fuel, making more of heat. These are all these are machines in space. Here are intuitive ways that they make sense to you as a person that has never been in space. And to take inspiration from a sort of machinery game like BattleTech, I spent a lot of time playing that game and writing blogs about that game and thinking about okay, how can we kind of be inspired by the many cool things in that game, even if it's a turn-based game. It's max on Earth. It's not real-time spaceships in space. It's still the there's something about the tactics. It's something about how the game systems become anthropomorphized by using these kind of core properties, etc.
I love that inspiration can come from just about anywhere, and it's really cool. Thanks for sharing ideas that you're still looking on how to implement. I think it's amazing to get a little bit of insight in there. My last question for you today is, people have had decades to acquire wealth and assets in EVE Online, and in EVE Frontier you have this degradation of things over time, but at the same time, EVE Online being a mirror to humanity, we've seen a lot of concentration in wealth over the past 20 years, especially around the world, period. I'm curious if you see that as a negative thing, or it just is what it is because it does mirror the real human experience, and if that was something you intentionally tried to fix with this mechanic in Frontier, or if it just was cool in a lot of other ways and happens to sort of solve that problem as well.
So, I think this distribution of wealth is a fundamental kind of aspect of humanity. But what usually happens if the gap between the poor and the rich becomes too wide, then there is a revolution.
Yeah.
And I think we see this again and again. Now we have quite a bit of wealth concentration and a gap between the poorest and the richest in our reality right now on planet Earth. I actually don't know whether it is the most it's ever been. I mean, it's almost I mean, I just don't know. I mean, it kind of feels like that, but probably maybe it always feels like that
Right.
when it's happening.
Yeah.
Like our own feelings about it cannot be compared with people's feelings from 100 years ago. They're just no longer here, and the written documentation about it is just what it is. I mean, it isn't a full capture of it, but generally there is a revolution. So I think some reset in the form of a revolution or disruption is like the natural resolution mechanic of this. Eve is actually pretty good at this, of creating this. We were very concerned in the beginning, what if one alliance just becomes dominant and now there's no war because nobody can fight them, and they frankly have just become a monoculture. This usually resolves itself in EVE Online either through kind of some other alliance taking over, or people somehow crumbling from the inside, like the people just leave the alliance for some other alliance. So I think EVE has a pretty good resolution mechanism. It isn't perfect. So, but what is out there is that people feel like it's too late to join EVE Online. Like even if it might actually be like the game is now 22, like literally today might be the best time in all of history to join EVE Online. That feels counterintuitive, but it's a little bit like, okay, why is it worthwhile to found a business in the world today when a few people in America seems to have all the money, like but people still do it. Like at some point, like those people just go through the circle of life, and it somehow gets redistributed, etc. And also, there's just still a lot of opportunities for new things to come alive and even take over. I mean, I think a company like Facebook is probably in many ways a pretty phenomenal example of that. I mean, 20 years ago it's being funded, and it's now like a mega company, like from zero to be one of the fangs in 20 years. I mean, it is pretty phenomenal when you think about it. And this does happen in EVE Online. Like, the landscape of EVE Online is very different now than it was 20 years ago. It will be very different 20 years from now. And we can think in those timescales when the game has been literally going for decades. So anyone joining EVE Online today will shape the future tremendously, like in the next coming 20 years for EVE. And obviously the same can be said about Frontier, because now nothing has been written. Everyone is doing, every solar system you go into is probably you're the first one to get there. But I wouldn't underestimate this aspect of EVE Online. Like, a player joining today literally might write the story of the next decade for EVE Online. It's often, I was having this thought exercise. So when we think of time travel movies, like Back to the Future, let's take that. So he goes back and is messing about with his parents, and tiny changes create massively different outcomes in the future to follow. We very rarely think about, like, what is it doing? What am I doing today? There's a tiny little thing that has like a massive change in the future. We think about time travel like that, but we don't think of like the present moment like that. So if like you were to go back in time, like you would not go and play World of Warcraft, you would go play in EVE Online, that would probably have a massive difference on you and on EVE Online if you had a time machine.
Right.
But that option exists today. You can absolutely just start today and write your own epic adventure, and thus the adventure of EVE Online or EVE Frontier. I mean, both games have these properties. But it's just easier to think about it as Frontier because it's a frontier. Nobody's there. Nothing has been written. But this exists. like when we, like I have here, like here's volume 2 of Empires of Eve, and I mean, at some point, volume 4 is going to be written 20 years from now, and are you going to be in it, or are you not going to be in it?
I love that. You always hear the best time to start was 20 years ago, but the second best time to start is today, and that's the epitome of what you just said there. Hilmar, an amazing time chatting with you. Thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you so much for building a Web3 as well as a active participant in that world. It's incredible to see somebody approach it with such an established IP and such thoughtful ideology into the concepts that you're bringing into Web3, and it's incredibly meaningful to myself and a bunch of people I care deeply about. So thank you, brother.
Yes. Yeah, very happy to be doing that. It's very exciting, I have to say. Like, it's also fucking hard, but that is as it should be.
Yeah, most things worth doing are fucking hard, so we take it as it comes. But thank you again, Hilmar.
Yeah. Thank you.